Yay! Came back for part two, which is chapter 10. I had to switch to a different room in my house because, well, my family's eating supper and I was in my dining room. So I hope you can hear me and see me okay. There we go, got some extra lighting types of things going on. All right, well, let's move along and learn about chapter 10. In chapter 10, we're going to be looking at non-experimental study designs. So I have a little pictogram here and we'll just move right along. Non-experimental designs, well, they're used for some different reasons. They're used when the researcher would like to construct a picture of a phenomena. They want to construct a picture of something that's happening, okay? And these types of study designs are going to explore events, people, or situations as they naturally occur. So when you hear that, people, experiences, you know that we're looking at qualitative studies, the quality of something in the participant's life. These types of study designs will also test relationships and the differences among the variables in those aspects. The non-experimental designs, they're independent in the fact that the independent variable is not manipulated, subjects are not randomized, and there's no control group. This type of a study design provides level 4 evidence. Here's a text from your book that kind of summarizes the non-experimental research designs. And when we say non-experimental, it means, well, really no experimenting, just looking at the situation. So this can be survey studies. They're descriptive, exploratory, comparative, relationship slash different studies. They can have correlational studies that we'll talk about later on, developmental studies. So these types of studies are cross-sectional, cohort, longitudinal, and prospective. They're also case-controlled, retrospective, and my favorite, ex post facto. We will be discussing. I can hardly wait. This is a type of study that I think everyone's heard of, and maybe some of you have been involved in, a survey study. These types of studies can be called descriptive, exploratory, or comparative. They're called comparative when used to determine differences between the variables. Turning off my light. Can you guys see me now? Oh, there I am. All right. These types of studies with the survey will collect detailed descriptions of existing variables. Data collection is done through questionnaires or interviews. Surveys use the data to justify and assess current conditions and practices or to improve healthcare practices. So I believe all of you have clinicals at the Mayo Clinic, and after you have a visit there, whether in the hospital or in the doctor's office, Mayo's going to send you a little Press Ganey survey to ask you about your experience. And so they're doing that to assess current conditions of the care that you received. They're doing this because they want to improve their healthcare practices. Surveys can take on all sorts of shapes. Your samples can be large or small. They can be broad or narrow. They can kind of cover about everything. But remember, they do not attempt to determine causation. We're not going to get cause and effect through survey sampling. Instead, the surveys will seek to relate variables to one another, kind of, well, if you have this, then perhaps you'll have this. Not causation, but just variables, more of like correlation. Surveys have lots of advantages. They can get you good amounts of information. They can be economical if done on a reasonable or small scale, and they can be typically accurate. Your participant will be honest with their answers. But like anything, there are disadvantages. Information obtained in a survey tends to be broad but superficial because the survey is just going to ask topical information. It usually won't get too in depth, so it's just going to be broad. It can be hard to understand context for sometimes in those completing the survey. Conducting a survey requires expertise in several research levels. You have to have that expertise level to go ahead and put the survey together to understand, first off, the material that you're studying, And then you need to understand what questions you have to ask to try to gain effective responses that can be turned into data for your study. Large scale surveys can be time consuming and costly. I think I've told you about the kidney study that I worked on. They used surveys, they were so expensive. You pay for printing, the paper, the ink, postage for sending them out, very, very expensive. Then on the flip side, you have to have people that can go through and disseminate the data from the surveys. Again, large scale, very expensive. And then we have the correlational study design. This study is interested in quantifying the strength and the direction, positive or negative, of a relationship. It examines the association between two or more variables. Do the variables covary? That's kind of a different word, isn't it? Covary. What does that mean? Well, it means that they vary together. They come together, so this variable will come together with another variable in a particular way that we may find predictive through our research practices. And in case you're wondering, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, this word was first established in 1950 through statistical practices. It came through our statistical or mathematical world. And I also noted in there that since this came out in 1950, it is older than me, in case you were wondering. There are several advantages that can be seen using the correlational study method. It can give you increased flexibility in investigating complex relationship structures. It's helpful though when you're looking at those complex relationships if the data cannot be manipulated, controlled, or randomized. We've talked about that in Chapter 9. We don't want that in our Chapter 10 data. This can be an efficient method to collect a large amount of data and potential for evidence-based application. We talked about that, like Mayo Clinic. They're going to give you a survey about your visit, what parts of it were good. Because it was good, then it led to you being a happy patient. This also can be a potential foundation for future experimental studies. So you've heard me talk about this. This study may grow arms and lead to other branches of research. That's always a good thing. When you have a study that's concerned with the relationships and differences among phenomena, that phenomena is the thing happening at one point in time, but also with changes that result over time, this is a developmental study. So think about this type of study. It starts here, you're looking at it here, and as it moves through time, as it develops, you want to see what changes results. There are three types of a developmental study, and that's your cross-sectional study, longitudinal, prospective, cohort studies, and those types of studies can also be referred to as repeated measures studies. We talked about that a little bit in Chapter 9. We'll hit on it again. And then we also have retrospective, as post facto, and case control studies. When you're looking at a study that examines data at one point in time, you're looking at a developmental study, cross-sectional study. So this means that the data is collected only one time, there's no intervention, and explores the relationships and correlations or differences and comparisons or both. So you're looking at one point in time, but you can do a lot of different things at that point in time. These cross-sectional studies have quite a few advantages to them. They're less time-consuming and less expensive. Because you're only looking at one data point, you're not going to put time and money into looking at multiple data points. Large amounts of data can be collected at one point, making the results readily available. You don't have to wait years or have multiple contacts to collect the information that you need. The confounding variable of maturation resulting from elapsed time is not present. I kind of talked about that. It's a one and done. You don't have to wait for time to pass to get your information. This type of study, it says difficult to establish an in-depth developmental assessment of the interrelationships of the phenomena. So, if you're going to look at it at one point in time and you don't need to go too deep, this is the way to go. This could be a good introductory study on a phenomena. You can get the data from it, and then you can go further with different studies in the future. This is a good way to get seed research money and allow you to work more further into the subject or phenomena. All right, I pulled out my highlighter and I'm using the green. So we've got developmental study, cohort, prospective, longitudinal studies. And as you can see, I highlighted repeated measures. The name right there gives it all away, repeated measures. This type of a study will collect data from the sample at different points in time. So repeated measures, we're going to go to our study cohort repeatedly at different points in time. We're going to explore their relationships and correlations or their differences and comparisons or both, also called repeated measures study. Oh, I read that last line, but I already talked about it. I think you get what this type of study does. A repeated measure studies has several advantages. Each subject is followed up separately and thereby serves as his or her own control group. You don't have to go out and find control groups, that you would randomize. Nope, that person acts as their own control group. So if I were doing this type of a study, so I would be my own control group. Don Pareda, party of one control group. Easy, right? There can be increased depths of responses that can be obtained because you're going to have multiple exposures to the study participant. The more you have contact with something, the better you get to know it. Early trends in data can be analyzed. You can analyze the data because you know you're going to be getting more data further on, and you can assess changes in the variables over time. So you've got multiple points across a spectrum to look at your data points. You can look at the relationships and differences that can be explored between the variables. Time goes on, things change, and you're going to study those changes in this type of research. Well, I pulled out my red marker here and I highlighted repeated measures in red, and I've included a spooky skull and crossbones. That's because this type of a study does have disadvantages, and I think they're not really going to be a surprise to you. Obviously, data collection can take a long time, and the longer you take collecting data and the more data you have, that's going to cost you more money and it's going to be more effort. And that just, if you don't have a big pot of money to go into, can kind of put you in a bad place study wise. Testing effects may be a threat if the testing subject is used to the test you're using. Again, they may not give honest results or honest answers. They may give the answers that they anticipate you want. Mortality is significant. Dun, 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 dun. You're talking about a study that goes on for a long time. People die. Mortality, morto, dead. Ugh. So that's something you need to think about in this type of a study. Or people move away. Perhaps they've joined the circus and they no longer live close to the study site, or they've moved to Florida where it's warm and sunny. Who knows? Or perhaps they got sick, or they just got old, or they just decided they don't want to be in your study anymore. This type of study has huge mortality issues. When you're reading the research data and critiquing it, that's something you need to take into account. Okay, here's a study that's fun to say. Case control retrospective ex post facto studies. Ooh, it's a mouthful. And I got out my green highlighter here because again, the name gives it away. Retrospective or ex post facto. That is so fun. And in case you're wondering, ex post facto is Latin from after the fact. So what we're trying to say is in these studies, you're going to look backward in time and examine exposure to the independent variable. You're going to attempt to link present events to events that occurred in the past. This type of study is also considered a causal comparative or comparative study. We're going to look at something that's going on now and we're going to compare it to something that happened in the past. So good studies that represent this would be global warming, climate control, population studies, population sprawl, definitely used in healthcare too. What did we do then? What are we doing now? So you do see them, and they certainly have their place in the world of research. Since this is such a fun thing to say, ex post facto study, I thought I'd pull one up and share it with you. So the example is we have a study linking smoking to lung cancer. I know you're going to have a hard time relating to this because none of you smoke. I just know that because we've talked about it. We've talked about it in N341, don't smoke. And we're talking about it now because you guys are so smart. You're going to live forever. Great. So the hypothesis of this study is that smoking is related to and a determinant of lung cancer. So our independent variable is X, all right? And our dependent variable is Y. So X is cigarette smoking, that none of you do, and the presumed cause is not manipulated, and subjects are not randomly assigned into groups. Subjects who experienced the cigarette smoking are recruited, none of you, and a control group who have not experienced X is chosen. So the control group is our Y, and these are the people like yourself who have never smoked and are not going to smoke because you're too smart for that. As our ex post facto study moves on, subjects in the control group resemble the smoking group in every way. Every way they're the same except for one thing: they do not smoke. The behavior, performance, or condition, so in this case, lung tissue, of the two groups is compared to determine whether the exposure to X cigarette smoking had the effect of lung cancer that was predicted by the hypothesis of the study. So the ex post facto study has its advantages. You're going to have a higher level of control with correlational studies and be more confident in your findings. Disadvantages is that causality cannot be inferred, only relationships and associations. So think about this: your extraneous variables are a major threat because groups may vary for reasons other than your independent variable. There may be other things going on in lives of the research participants that are just not taken into account in these types of studies. They can be narrow. We're looking at lungs and cigarette smoking. So when we're talking about time in the context of research and studies, we've got retrospective, which we know retro means looking back. Okay, so we're looking into the past. These types of studies are common. They can be fast and cheaper because you're just looking back at data, not at people, like actual people, just at their data. It can be a source, though, of weaker evidence, and you can have less control of extraneous variables. Findings suggest associations or relationships, not cause and effect, just associations, okay? Prospective means you're looking into the future. So you're starting here and you're planning to study into the future with your study participants. These types of studies are less common, and that's honestly because they are slow and expensive. In research, money is king and it can be hard to come by. But these types of studies do give us stronger evidence because we have our starting point and we follow it into the future. You have better control of extraneous variables because you're getting your research participants right at the beginning and then following them into the future. And these findings suggest associations or relationships as well. That part we do have in common. There are definitely other study types out there. In case you haven't realized it, there are all sorts of study types out there, quite a few, more than I'm sure you thought when the class began. So we've got a methodological here. That's development and evaluation of data collection instruments, scales, or techniques. Okay, something to think about. Psychometrics, theory and development of measurement instruments, such as your questionnaires or measurement techniques, which can be observational techniques. Think about people who sit out in the jungles and forests and woods and watch your animals. That would be an observational technique. Okay, psychometrics, they measure concepts such as anxiety or even quality of life. So, methodological research is in a stepwise manner. So, first you have to define the construct, concept, or behavior to be measured. To do this, you're going to do a literature review. You're going to do that lit review to see what's already out there. Is the evidence out there and really doesn't warrant a deeper look by you as the researcher, or are there some aspects that could be covered and discovered? Then you need to formulate the tool that's going to measure or question the thing that you're researching. After you've done that, you're going to develop instructions for users and respondents. You have the tool, well, then you need to set a guideline of how it's to be used. Testing the tool's reliability and validity is something that's part of this process as well. You have to make sure your testing tool is reliable and valid. Okay, if it's not reliable or valid, you cannot treat the study subjects or conduct your research in the same manner. You have to do it the same every time so that you have fidelity, fairness, and clarity all the way through your research. We've talked about study designs, but I also want to mention secondary analysis. And in case you're wondering, what is that picture? It's supposed to be a tree, branches of a tree. Oh, my computer only gave me so many options. So secondary analysis, it's not a design, but rather a research method. And you've heard me talk about it. This is when the researcher takes previously collected and analyzed data from one study and reanalyzes the data or a subset of the data for a secondary purpose. Original study may be either experimental or non-experimental design. This is when you take something that's already in existence, you comb it over, you're looking at the data, and then you're going to help that study to grow new arms. The tree is growing new arms, the data, the research is growing new arms. I have worked on several studies that do this. This is a good way for researchers to save money, get a good amount of data without having to go out and develop the research tools and research designs, and it can really get them going in their research process. Let's say in your world of research, you want to mix things up. Well, you can do that. It's called mixed methods. Isn't that cool? Yeah. This uses multi-method research, and it means that including all in one study, you can use a variety of data sources, such as use of different investigators, use of multiple research theories in one study, or use of multiple methods. So you can mix it up, bring in different sources, different angles, and see kind of what results you get. Actually, mixed methods, I'm making it sound like a mess, but you'd be surprised at how often it is used. So when you read studies, look for mixed methods and then investigate what were they. So we've looked at these different types of studies, study designs. Now we have to look at critiquing them. So now that you have all this information, let's go ahead and look at how you would critique. You're going to look at the theoretical framework. Is the rationale for the type of study design appropriate? Did they put in the proper base to build and hold up the study? Is the design congruent with the purpose of the study? If you want to look at, I don't know, like I said, Mayo Clinic, they want to know how your visit was and how you felt about it after the fact. That type of a study, it's probably a cross-sectional study, that one-time look and after effect. You're not going to get a lot of data on the beginning. Well, is that the design that they put in place for the study? If not, it just doesn't work and it's really not valid. Is the design appropriate for the research question or hypothesis? Again, did the researcher use their brain and put things together smartly? Okay, is the design suited to the data collection methods? Probably, again, Mayo Clinic, they're best to use surveys instead of having someone call every single patient. So phone calls would not be proper intervention and data collection where the survey is. Does the researcher present the findings in a manner congruent with the design used? That last point, all I can really stress is, were they honest about what happened in their study? Were they transparent? Because that's so important. You have to be transparent in the world of research. This next slide really talks again about that honesty and transparency in the study and the published data. Does the researcher go beyond parameters of findings and erroneously infer cause and effect? We're not inferring cause and effect here. It's more of do things pair up? We're not saying this happened and it's because of this. No, we're just saying, hey, we kind of have some things happening. We're looking at how they come together, basically. Were they appropriate? How does the researcher discuss the threats? Were there bias? And we need to know that because if they don't discuss it, then they've skewed their data results. And that's really important. So remember, you need to look for clarity and transparency in the research data that you're reading in your journal article. Is the researcher able to make recommendations about changes that can be made based on the strength and quality of the evidence provided by their design and the findings? So basically, did their research provide any evidence-based practices that can be used to make things better in the world of healthcare? So really look, did this study make a difference? Did it serve a purpose? That's important because again, research is expensive and it should be purposeful in what it's looking at and what it's trying to explain. Well, we're almost at the end, so of course I had to put in some quiz questions. What is the primary difference in experimental and non-experimental designs? You have choices here, and I would love to talk with you about what you feel is the correct answer. Let's go to the next slide because I think we have one more question. Jackie, since you made it to the last slide, I wanted to do something a little special to say thank you. I don't know how cooperative he's going to be, probably not much. Jackie, this is my dog Jack, and he kind of, well, he's a good friend, but he can kind of drive me crazy sometimes. Jack, can you say hi to all of my students? Can you say hi to them? No, okay, yeah. So I think Jack is sending his love and kisses to you guys. Thank you, Jack. They're right there. They're in the computer. All the students are in the computer. Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you, baby. Here's our last question. Go ahead, read it through, and then think about what your answer would be. Um, I'd love to discuss your answers with you, and you can meet me on Zoom tomorrow if you'd like. Again, it's not required, but I'd certainly love to have you touch base and talk. All right. Thank you for trying this different alternative learning process with me. And please give me your feedback on it because I'd like to know what you think about this and if it's something I should use in the future for N354. Thank you for your time. Bye, guys. Jack, do you want to say goodbye? Say bye, guys. All right. Thank you, baby. All right. Stop. Oh, Jack. Okay. We gotta think about